What's going on, people? I want to do something a little bit different today. As you guys all know, Elder Scrolls Legends Asia currently contains everything from the core set and the Fall of the Dark Brotherhood sets in-game. But this is not historically the exact same core set that we've had the entire time. So what I wanted to do, and I think maybe we'll break it down by color, or maybe a couple colors at a time, or just the biggest changes I think overall. I wanted to go through and take a look at some cards that compare their current state and what they used to be. For example, and I wish I had images to show, but all of the balance patches have been removed from the Legends website, the super old articles, so you're going to have to just trust me. There is a Reddit post that I'm using as reference. But the first card that I wanted to talk about that has been changed, and it was a relatively minor change, but a major one overall in the scope of the design of the game, was Relentless Raider. And Relentless Raider's change was actually a pretty simple one. Relentless Raider used to read, after an enemy rune is destroyed, deal 1 damage to... It used to read, when an enemy rune is destroyed, deal 1 damage to your opponent. And what that meant, and it may not be completely obvious to all players, the change from when to after is actually a pretty big one. It was never a super great combo deck, but there was a combo deck, and probably still could be a combo deck in this version, of a Wisp Mother OTK. And the general idea of it was, you use Wisp Mother to get 5 Relentless Raiders on the board, and then you break your opponent's rune, and each rune break would deal 5 damage, since you had 5 Relentless Raiders, which would then break the next rune, bringing your opponent down to 0. When the text read, when an enemy rune is destroyed, the way damage is calculated in Legends, it would count the rune break, deal the 5 damage, and then it would act as if all 30 damage from the Relentless Raider rune breaks was dealt simultaneously, meaning regardless of any prophecies you may have hit along the way, Relentless Raider would always just flat out kill you no matter what, ignoring prophecies. So the change to after an enemy rune is destroyed allowed you, if you hit a Prophecy Lightning Bolt or literally anything along the way that you could use to kill a Relentless Raider, you could hit one of those and interrupt the OTK. Still an incredibly strong game-ending play if you can pull it off. However, it is not without counterplay, and it makes sense in the world of Legends, where if you're breaking runes and prophecies exist, you should allow the player a chance to hit the prophecy if they are running them. The next change that I wanted to talk about is a relatively simple one overall, but one that actually means quite a bit, especially for the way the game stands right now. And that's the Northwind Outpost. Northwind Outpost actually used to be a 2-mana card. So this is a 2-mana friendly strength creatures have +1/+0, and that was just honestly incredibly strong in general for aggressive red decks. Charmer had a deck called Time to Fight, which just had a ton of... Basically, the entire deck was red charge creatures, and Northwind Outpost, or stacking multiple Northwind Outposts, was just incredibly strong for that deck. And just in general, if you compare it to like Market Archer being even easier to pull off, or just Atromancer Battle Mage or Merrick Battle Mage, there's so many different decks that have lots of Firebrands in them, and Northwind Outpost costing 2 just made Firebrands way too threatening, and just all red creatures even more threatening, and red is already the best aggressive color in the game, so them having an even higher power boost that they can get to off of a relatively cheap card was just incredible. So they bumped up the cost to 3, slowing an aggro deck down a ton, to the point where you don't run this in a normal aggro deck. You have to kind of use it as in a combo piece, as you saw when I played Market Archer on the channel. But still, Northwind Outpost is an incredibly strong card that has seen a nerf. Next card we're going to talk about is actually going to be a buff, and there are a couple buffs along the way, and it actually kind of seems crazy to think about this card pre-buff, and that is Morkel Gatekeeper. Morkel Gatekeeper actually used to not have Prophecy. It was a 3-mana 2/2 with Guard, and the ability Summon, give a creature +2/+0. And honestly, it was okay in its pre-buff state. I wouldn't call it a super high-quality card by any means, but it was not horrendous. But for some reason, whatever reason, it saw little to no play, or just not enough play to where the developers thought that it needed a little bit more oomph. So Morkel Gatekeeper was, I think, the only card in the history of the game that was granted Prophecy without starting with it. Obviously made Morkel Gatekeeper a much more attractive inclusion in a lot of decks. A 3 Magicka 2/2 Prophecy is already not the worst since it has Guard, and then the ability to give something else or even itself +2 is not bad. A 4/2 Guard Prophecy is solid, and the ability to use it as reach or protecting your other aggressive cards. Snorkel Gatekeeper is just a really, really solid, flexible card. I would say the buff hit the nail on the head. I wouldn't say Snorkel Gatekeeper is too strong, but it's a very, very strong card. Next up, we have a card that you still probably don't see played very often, but it used to see a lot more play, is Gladiator's Arena. This card used to be a 3 Magicka support, and at that Magicka cost, it's just a little bit too efficient, especially for things like Prophecy Battle Mage. Being able to slap down 2 of these and deal 4 damage to each player every turn. It's kind of like an aggro player's dream. So turning it from a 3 cost to a 4 cost support just slowed it down a touch, again, to where if you're an aggressive deck, you can't just instantly slap this into your deck without thought. You can still consider running it, but at 4 Magicka cost, it is very slow for what an aggressive deck wants to be doing. I would say that I haven't seen it a ton since the nerf. I've seen it once in a while in a Prophecy Battle Mage deck. But overall, this was one of those nerfs that kind of killed this card. But the inevitability of it kind of made you have to run support removal if this card was ever too popular. So this is one of the ones that I wasn't too sad to see go. But yeah, used to be a much stronger card. 3 Magicka Gladiator Arena. Next up, we've got another buff. It just so happens to be the first premium legendary I pulled in this game. Reeve the Blade Master. So he was a 4 Magicka 2/5 back in the day. His effect was exactly the same. However, being a 2/5 meant that your 4 Magicka Reeve could be killed by something as small as a 1 Magicka Execute. Now, obviously, a unique legendary is supposed to be very high power, and Reeve's effect is incredibly high powered, and his 5 health means that he cannot be lightning bolted to be killed. However, your 4 Magicka unique legendary being able to be easily killed by an Execute, which just kind of feels bad for Reeve, and he doesn't have any immediate value that you can gain, so he needs to stick on the board for a turn in order for him to really be worth it. Unlike something, say, Lucian Lechance, who does die to Execute. However, you can play Lucian and get instant value from him, so it makes it less of a horrible play if he gets executed. Reeve needs to attack, so the developers actually buffed him from 2 attack to 3, just removing one of the most common ways to remove him, as well as just making it so if he has to trade into a creature, it's more likely he kills them. 3 attack versus 2 is one of the first health tiers in the game. I would say the major health tiers are 1 health, obviously, for tokens and Skaven type effects. You've got your 2 health for Lightning Bolt, 3s for just Crushing Blow, really, 4s for Lightning Bolt, and then anything higher than that is Javelin. So each tier of health that you move up is just a series of cards that can no longer kill you. And the 2 attack or less, obviously, for Execute and Arrowstorm. So Reeve was moved out of that range. The next card we're going to talk about is a card that you probably haven't seen played very often at all. It is Burn and Pillage. This card actually used to be pretty nuts. I just want to double check the mana to cost while I'm talking about it. But yeah, this card used to cost 6 mana, and the ability was deal 1 damage to all enemy creatures, period, for each enemy destroy rune. So this was like a better Ice Storm, because it didn't hurt your own creatures, and it was like an aggressive board clear, so that you could just wipe your opponent's board. If you've broken 4 runes, it dealt 4 damage to everything your opponent had and dealt damage to none of your creatures. So Burn and Pillage went from being like an incredibly insane card to now being brought down to 5 Magicka, deal 1 damage to all enemy creatures in a lane. Still not a horrible effect, but not the kind of one that you're ever going to run in a control deck because you don't want to be breaking runes. And for an aggressive deck, there's just not quite the same amount of blowout potential to where you want to run this as much. So Burn and Pillage got mostly killed by that nerf, but it was just like way too good in its pre-nerf state. Next up, we have one of, I think, 2 cards that have been both buffed and nerfed. Belligerent Giant, his buff was being able to target friendly creatures. So the unsummon used to be just enemy creatures. So now you can unsummon a friendly creature if for some reason you wanted to be able to use a summon effect multiple times. Not a super common use case, I admit. However, the flexibility makes Belligerent Giant such a powerful card, so being able to bounce your own creature if you need to is very, very strong. Belligerent Giant's nerf was a very similar thing. However, it was given the in this lane stipulation. Previously, Belligerent Giant used to be able to be, for example, be played in the shadow lane and bounce a creature in the field lane. This obviously was just very powerful because you can hide it from your opponent's other creatures while still bouncing their most powerful creature if they had complete field lane control, for example. So this did weaken Belligerent Giant a bit, meaning if you wanted to bounce something in a stacked lane, you'd have to leave it exposed with its kind of low 4 health. However, I think it was a fair nerf, as well as highlighting one of the kind of strongest points of Legends, and that is the lane system. So making the unsummon effect focus on a specific lane just does more to play into the identity of Legends. So I am all over that one. We got 2 more to talk about. The first one is going to be Unstoppable Rage. Unstoppable Rage, believe it or not, actually used to be a 7 Magicka card. Back in those days, Rage was like one of, if not the most popular decks on the ladder. 7 Magicka meant you could play Child of Her Scene on turn 6 and Rage on turn 7 and kind of just OTK your opponent away if they had cards in the lane. Or if you had the ring, you could ring out Belligerent Giant and then play Unstoppable Rage on the next turn. Just 7 was a bit too early for the OTKs that Unstoppable Rage kind of enables. So the devs did bump this card up to an 8-cost card, which I am completely on board with because Unstoppable Rage was just super, super strong. And it's still super, super strong. Throughout the history of Legends, people wanted this card nerfed again, actually. Did not wind up being the case. But a bump from 7 to 8 was quite the large change. And the final card I wanted to talk about today was a slight buff. It's actually a dual attribute card, but I wanted to talk about it here since its primary attribute is strength. And that is Elena Banach. Her slight buff was, she used to be a 6-mana 1/1 with the ability deal 1 damage to an enemy creature. So previously her ability with the lethal ping, while 95% of the time you're going to want to kill an enemy creature with the lethal ping, if you found yourself in a situation where your opponent only had 1 health remaining, in the past, Elena Banach could not target your opponent's face to end the game. So she was given the slight buff of, much like Sharpshooter Scout and other 1 damage ping effects, being able to target anything on the board, including your opponent's face, making Elena Banach just slightly ever more flexible in the off-chance scenario that your opponent has 1 health left and Elena is your only way to end the game. Makes her even better. Completely agree with it. She's a unique legendary. She should have as much power as is reasonable to keep her balanced. So I was 100% on board with that buff. So yeah, that's it for strength. If you guys are interested in stuff like this, I do want to go through the rest of the attributes just in case anyone is curious. I know a lot of people joined Legends late, so they may not have been familiar with some of the balance changes that we got early on in the game. The balance changes that I talked about today were mostly just from the first, I would say, year or so of Legends coming out of beta, being open beta into, I think it was about Skyrim range of expansions. So yeah, let me know if you guys like this type of discussion. If you guys want to see the rest of the colors, let me know down below in the comment section. As always, thank you all very much for watching, and we'll see you guys next time. Peace.